The purpose of Ch'an, or Zen. As will be seen from the Great Pearl's own words, he was an earnest exponent of the doctrine of sudden illumination, which at any rate from the time of the sixth patriarch onwards has always been the central teaching of Ch'an. For this school came into prominence on a wave of reaction against the religiosity by which, so its adherents felt, the force of Buddhism was being weakened. Apparently, many people had fallen into the belief that good works, piety, symbolical ceremonies, and above all, constant study and recitation of the sacred books could of themselves advance the adept along the road to enlightenment. Thus, these people had lost sight of the goal amid a welter of means. They had mistaken their rafts for the trees on the further shore. They no longer understood that good works, however admirable their immediate results, can only be of lasting benefit to the doer if he consciously applies the technique of relinquishment not only to money, time, energy, and property, but also to the most cherished components of his own self or personality. Nor did they remember that piety is of little use unless properly directed towards the eradication of the notion of a self, or that it is positively harmful to the pious one if it bolsters up that notion by affording him feelings of self-satisfaction, spiritual pride, and so forth. They forgot that symbolical ceremonies are meaningless unless properly used as a drill for stimulating those qualities which lead to the growth of wisdom and compassion, and thereby eliminating all selfishness. And they did not see that the study of sacred books is a woeful waste of time unless the teachings contained in them are constantly applied by the adept to the uses he makes of his triple endowment of body, speech, and mind. The central doctrine of Ch'an or Zen. The Ch'an masters say, in effect, let us get to the root of things. Once we have heard, studied, or intuitively discovered enough to know what Buddhism is about, let us relinquish everything in a tremendous effort to focus our minds on what is real. So long as our minds are out of focus, the objects of the senses, the sensations to which they give rise, and the stored results of those sensations will impinge upon them, setting up endless chains of action and reaction. A process of correcting this wrong focus or false vision can be counted gradually only in the sense that most people require long and careful preparation. But true perception, when we have learned how to be ready for it, will burst upon us in a flash. Though our minds remain out of focus by no more than a millionth of an inch, everything will seem to us very nearly as it seemed before, despite our careful preparation. However, when true focus is attained, reality will flash upon us. The whole universe of phenomena will be seen as it really is. Its power to hamper and afflict us will be instantaneously destroyed. And our remaining stores of karma will be burnt up in that flash, and nothing will remain for us except the duty of pointing the way so that others in their turn may achieve the ultimate vision, just as we have done. When that final intuition bursts upon us like a blinding light, we shall discover that nothing exists or ever has existed except in our minds. That indeed our minds are not our minds, but pure mind itself. That this pure mind is perfectly quiescent, a pure void in that it is utterly without form characteristics, opposites, multiplicity, subject, object, or anything at all on which to lay hold. And yet that it is certainly not void, in that it is the beginningless beginning, an endless end of all the phenomena which from moment to moment contribute to the unceasing flux of what we call existence. This void is at once the container and the contained, the one and the many, the neither one nor many, the doomed and the deathless, relativity and ultimate truth, samsara and nirvana, without a hair's breadth of difference between any of these or other pairs. Perceiving this, we shall seem to others to have taken a sudden leap, as though from somewhere to nowhere. Indeed, sudden leap, though inaccurate, is perhaps the best term with which to describe the process. Yet in truth, we shall have leapt from nowhere to nowhere. Hence, we shall not have leapt at all, nor will there be, or has there ever been, any we to make the leap. Nothing will have changed except our point of view. What was formerly misperceived in the light of our little egos, we shall now rightly perceive in the glorious light of egolessness. Thenceforward, though our environment, the surrounding flux, will continue its moment-to-moment transformations as before, we shall be capable of seeing all this play of phenomena as tiny ripples upon the surface of changelessness. And we shall clearly recognize the changelessness of change. As a mirror impartially reflects green and red, black and white, without being to the smallest extent affected by any of them, as the spray of a waterfall reflects all the colors of the rainbow without losing its colorless purity, as dreamers behold acts of love and violence without moving so much as a hand, so does the mind of the enlightened one react to the ceaseless play of phenomena. All of this will be more or less so in the deepest spiritual sense, and yet we should be aware of taking these analogies of mirror, spray, and dreamer too concretely. For even a mirror suggests a plurality of the reflector, the act of reflecting, and the thing reflected. Whereas these three do not in truth differ from one another, so that beyond a certain point, even the mirror is a mere analogy, another raft to be discarded. The Great Pearls, Sastra, and Dialogues. The general similarity of form found in the scripture, the Sastra itself, and in the dialogues which follow is due to the Great Pearl's preference, typical of the Ch'an or Zen school as a whole, for the dialogue system of exposition. At the time when he wrote the former, he had not yet acquired any pupils, so it is clear that he composed the questions himself. Relieved of the necessity to provide the ornaments of style and verbal links which other forms of exposition require, the Great Pearl was able to achieve a forceful terseness which is very much to the point from beginning to end, a style which brings us closer to him, because he seems to be addressing us straight from his heart, as though we were actually face to face with him. Yet, at the same time, his Sastra possesses a great advantage over the books containing the teachings of many other Ch'an masters, such as Huang, in that the Great Pearl composed it himself, and could thus select and arrange his material as he wished, whereas what remains to us of the teachings of Huang Po and others consists only of what their disciples chose to record. In a way, the present work is complementary to the Zen teaching of Huang Po, for while both masters carry to us the very heart of things, Huang Po deals rather more uniformly with the subject, whereas the Great Pearl relates each part of his exposition more specifically to some of the various tenets common to the Mahayana as a whole, or to a particular tenets emphasized by this school or that, as well as to some of the doctrines of Taoism. It seems to me that Huang Po gives us a brilliant overall picture of the means of arriving at the goal, and that the Great Pearl deals just as brilliantly, more precisely, with most of the separate difficulties involved. And for this reason, while his book is by no means of less interest than Huang Po's to the general reader, it will make a special appeal to those readers with a detailed knowledge of the various facets of traditional Buddhist doctrine. There has been a tendency among some scholars, both Chinese and Western, to regard Chan Buddhism as something much more apart from the general line of Mahayana Buddhist teaching and practice than the facts warrant. The present work should serve to correct that tendency, for it links branch and stem together in such a way as to make it obvious that the only real difference between them is one of emphasis. The Great Pearl's frequent references to the Mahayana Sutras indicate that though a staunch believer in the doctrine of sudden as opposed to gradual illumination, he well understood the necessity of a thorough grounding in doctrine before the great leap can be attempted. Indeed, the difference between the exponents of sudden and gradual enlightenment is a more subtle one than at first appearance. At times, it may even be largely a verbal distinction. For while imperfect perception, however slightly imperfect, cannot possibly be perception of the absolute, that is, of reality itself, and we therefore remain in the dark up to the final moment of sudden realization. Yet that final moment must, with most beings, be the result of tremendous gradual preparation. We can say that a drop of water boils suddenly, and that so long as its temperature remains even half a degree below boiling point, it does not boil at all. Or we may say that the boiling process is gradual in that it takes some time for the drop to reach the temperature at which it can boil. When the Master Hui Hai tells us that a sudden and perfect illumination can take place within us in this very life, it is to be understood that this will happen only if we know how to accomplish it. The learning how is generally a gradual process, though it can be greatly shortened if, with the assistance of the Great Pearl's teaching, we learn just what to look for and how to set about it. I do not think that the Great Pearl had any idea that we should realize our Buddha nature within a few minutes or days of digesting his sastra. His emphasis on the suddenness has quite another meaning, which may perhaps be imperfectly expressed as follows. So long as we retain concepts of I and other than I, that is, of subject and object, of objective beings to be enlightened, of their grasping at something objective called enlightenment, of a thisness and an otherness, we shall remain impossibly far from the goal. In such cases, even millions of eons spent in undertaking charitable works, in acquiring a theoretical knowledge of the sutras, and in other pious practices, will not help us to approach an inch nearer. Whereas, if we relinquish everything, including the notion of an I to be enlightened, as well as the notion of enlightenment as something apart from or differing from anything else, if we understand that in reality there is no grasper, no grasping, and no grasp, only then can we establish a point of view which, though at first theoretical, will make us ripe for the sudden flash of illumination that reveals the true nature of ourselves and of everything else. Once this point of view is firmly established and well tested by our gradual acquired ability to reflect and perceive the infinitude of our surroundings with mirror-like stainlessness, we may hope to attain that sudden flash of illumination very soon indeed, perhaps even in this life. There are, of course, formidable difficulties to be overcome. The last and very greatest of which is that when illumination is about to burst upon us, we may feel a sense of elation and accomplishment, which will immediately throw us back to our starting point. For a sense of accomplishment implies an I who accomplishes, an accomplishing and a something accomplished. Wherefore we shall hurtle back into the realm of duality, of pluralism, and all our efforts will have been in vain. Another great obstacle is that while constantly reflecting on the voidness of opposites, on the unity of mind substance common to us all, we may grow attached to the concept of void, which will similarly throw us back upon the horns of duality, in that the concept of void is meaningless unless in opposition to the concept of non-void. Therefore, if we are to succeed, we must so train our minds as to free them absolutely from every concept whatsoever. There must be no thought either of attainment or of non-attainment, of void or non-void, since monism is a rock no less precipitous than dualism. Furthermore, in training our minds towards that exalted conceptless state, we must take ceaseless care to avoid becoming involved in likes and dislikes. We must learn to recognize all that is foul and horrible, all that is delicious and lovable, as being no more separate than ominous black rollers and the pure white crests of dancing wavelets are separate from the sea.